Okay, we are live for the last time this year. The last book talk on Book Talk for 2022, and I realized whenever I date my files, whether I'm editing or writing, a lot of times I'll put the date that I'm working on it, like 12/22/22, and I realized the other day I wrote 12/22/21. And there's Tanya in the comments, Celtic Blue to you. So for those of you who are joining, she's my moderator. She's the executive producer. She lines up all our guests. And today we're going to have some great folks on. We have Katie Carroll, who writes books for YA middle grade and children. So we haven't had a whole lot of that represented yet on the show, so that's great. And then we're going to have Troy Duran back. He has been on the show before. He's a narrator. He would probably not be a great fit for any of Katie's books because he does a lot of the romance and the spicy stuff. So that'll be fun to hear them bounce off each other. But anyway, so I realized whenever I saved a file the other day, I saved it as 12/22/21. So my mind's all the way back in 2021, and we're about to be in 2023. So who knows what year I'm gonna think it is whenever January 1st finally comes around. Luckily, the only time I have to sign a check is for the Texas High Plains Riders. I'm the treasurer, and I try to do that as little as possible. So hopefully I don't mess it up too much. And so we're a few minutes early. We'll have Katie Carroll and Troy Duran here, and we'll talk about books and narrating and creativity and the end of the year and everything else like that. Appreciate all of you who are rolling in to watch. I guess the big book news is still the USA Today list still being on hiatus, although that doesn't affect the folks here on TikTok near as much as it does some other places. I know quite a few USA Today bestsellers and haven't seen them have any strong reactions. I think everyone's, there's Troy Duran. I think everyone's pretty much expecting it to come back around the first of the year. They hire a new editor to get all that stuff done.
Hey, look at that. I'm here.
Hey, Troy, how's it going?
There we go. Hey, hold on a sec here. I don't know if it happens to you too, but like now, every time I hop onto this thing, it prompts me to be to do a filter, like some kind of a goofy filter, like stars or something. I'll spare you.
No, it hasn't. Of course, now I'm the host, right? So
Yeah.
I'm sure that I see different screen, and I've never actually joined someone else's live. Although I think I might try that. Who knows? With the new year, I always like to expand what I'm doing, try new things. Although before I do that, I have to get some stuff wrapped up in the next week, which is why I haven't been making videos for my page really or much of anything because I'm behind on reading some stuff. I'm behind on formatting a book for work. So
Oh yeah.
the end of the year, it's always like, oh hey, I'm about to basically take a whole week and not be able to do a darn thing. So I need to get some stuff before that comes up.
Yeah, the week between
You
Christmas
got
and
any
New Year's is like your preparation for next year, right?
right? Have you do you have any fun plans for that week?
I just have to get caught up. I spent the last 2 weeks. I had bronchitis, and for
Yeah,
people
I
like
had the flu
me.
last week, so
Oh, did you? Yeah. So yeah, it set me back. I was dead in the water. I couldn't do
yeah,
anything. So now I'm just like
yeah,
reading
same
like
here.
a madman, trying to catch up
Yeah.
on all my work. So that's probably my week next week is just catching up on audiobooks.
And so for the flu obviously has a certain set of symptoms, but for a voice actor, I imagine bronchitis is other than laryngitis is probably about the worst thing that you can get because you really you can't be productive at all even if you're kind of feeling okay. Your voice just isn't going to be there.
Yeah, yeah. I tried to like so certain characters in these books all of a sudden had these really deep gravelly voices, and that was my attempt at like kind of making lemonade out of lemons.
Well, you sound like you're feeling a lot better now, though.
I feel great. Yeah, I'm feeling good. I finally broke down and went and got uh, I got they gave me a Z pack with like
Hmm.
zithromycin and uh, oh shoot, there were a bunch of things. There was like a steroidal and
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
those things, and it really knocked it out, within a couple of days. So next time
Nice.
I'll
And
do
we
it.
got Katie with us. Oh, well, she there we
Yep.
go.
Katie, hi.
There.
Hello.
Oh,
So,
and oh, I like you've got all your books in the background. My desk is kind of out in our living room, so I have a partition behind me. But that's a pretty nice setup. Is that your library, or are those books that you have done behind you?
These are all my books behind me.
Nice.
Um, I'm in the upper floor, so I'm actually sitting on the floor because it's like the low ceilings.
Oh yeah,
But it's a nice backdrop.
yeah.
yeah.
Where do
I
you guys do you have a specific place where you do where you do your writing?
Right now, mostly on my kitchen table.
Oh, really? Okay.
Well, so upstairs is like one big floor, and it's kind of like two split office spaces and some play area for the kids. And it just seems like there's always somebody else up here.
Hmm.
So, if I have my laptop or my Alpha Smart, I can just set up anywhere. And the kitchen table just seems to be convenient the last couple years. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
Do you have to have all sorts of stuff spread out, like your chart of characters and backstories and plot lines and things like that?
It really depends on the project. Usually for my novels, I don't have, sometimes with revision, I have more
Mhm.
stuff spread out, but I tend to be more of a pantser when I'm drafting. So for those, it's just like my scene list that I'm kind of keep running as I'm going. Uh, I do write picture books too. Those I tend to have a little more spread out because I like to be real tactile with those. So once I get to a certain point of writing the manuscript, I kind of cut and paste and start to visualize what it's going to look like on a page.
Yeah. Have you seen
and
the controversy over the AI artwork in books?
Yeah. So, I mean, we're content creators, right? All of
Hmm.
us in one way or another. And um, I mean, for me, I believe in paying artists for their work.
Hmm.
Uh, is AI art, AI writing going to have a place somewhere? Probably. I don't think it's going away. I just think that the laws and sort of the ethics of everything haven't really kept up with the technology. So until we kind of
they
figure that
never did.
out, yeah, they never really never do. So until we kind of figure out a better place, for me, it's like I'm going to hire an artist to do the work for me.
Hmm.
Um, I'm going to write my own work. Uh, it, I mean, maybe perhaps for, some of the things like blog writing or something that's a little less, I'm not going to say creative, but a little more formulaic.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Perhaps I may utilize some of those tools. And I know people who are utilizing AI writing tools to enhance their own writing. But for me, it's all coming out of here.
Yeah. I don't. I
Well,
don't.
and and it affects Troy too a lot because I got an email. I think it was about 2 weeks ago. My publisher saying, "Hey, if you because the way our my publishing deal works is if I want to, I can finance and create my own audiobook for my books. It doesn't have to go through them." And so they said, "Hey, if you're looking for a way to do it and can't find the right narrator, here's we wanted to let you know about this AI option." And I'm like, "Oh wow, that surprises me that they would be kind of sharing that with us." But that just goes to show that there are a lot of. I think he sent that out. Because there are a lot of people asking about it and asking if they could, and it's they want to try a new option, and it's like I just I cannot imagine that being better than having somebody you can talk to and go through the little things with. And yeah, it's nuts. I'm kind of with Katie as far as the word on the words part of it. That
Mhm.
for blogs like corporate blogs, like I know that a friend of mine used to kind of worked remotely and did blog posts for like a bank or something like that. And okay, that, I can see if they want to cut out, paying a person and use AI to come up with, stuff like that. That doesn't offend me so much because I looked into that and they don't pay their writers anything anyway. So it's
Hmm.
no one, I would say very few people are relying on that for steady income. And if they are, then they might want to, find another way to try to make a living because that sounds awful.
Yeah.
So I imagine eventually that's probably where the AI writing is going to fit in the most. Um, I, if I ever read a novel and find out later that it was written by AI and I enjoyed the novel, that's when I'll be like, okay, maybe I need to start looking for even another line of work. But I
Hmm.
don't think that any kind of AI could ever replicate that kind of stuff, no more than they could replicate the choices that you would make, Troy, on any given project you're doing, because you make so many choices. It's not just me reading off a page. Like I could not at all do what you do as a voice actor. And then on the art part of it, I've seen some of that stuff, and it's so very hard to replicate. Like you have an established character and make it look the same throughout all
Yeah.
the scenes, and that would be even harder, I think, for AI to pull off and really make something with the same quality that a person does. Real quick, I'm going to say we've got some people rolling in, so there's an introduction. We need to log in, but Book Talk on Book Talk is what we're calling the show, and we talk about books. And we have a narrator, Troy Duran, and Katie Carroll is an author who writes young adult, middle grade, and picture books, if I have that right. And so we're just going to talk about a whole bunch of stuff here for as long as we want to go. Katie, I did want to ask you, what drew you to writing for a younger audience, all the way down to picture book and then kind of stopping it at YA? Because, that I didn't read books for young adults when I was a young adult, so that's not a type of, that's not a frame of mind I can get into. Why do you prefer writing for that audience as opposed to adults?
There's a lot of reasons behind that. The first part's kind of sad. Um, I was 19, and my younger sister, who was 16, passed away very unexpectedly.
I'm
Um,
sorry.
Thank you. It's been over 20 years now. Um, and she was a big fan of books that I don't like to talk about on social media anymore that were very meaningful to me at one time and have the books still have meaning to me, but the author is not someone that I want to talk about. I don't want to give them my money anymore.
Hmm.
Um, so she was a big fan of those books and got many people into reading. And I think only the first four came out before she passed away. This is a long time ago. And I was in college at the time studying to be a physical therapist. Had always been writing in my life, but never thought, oh, this is what I want to do. And as a reader, young adult wasn't as much a thing when I was a young adult.
Hmm.
This was like pre-Twilight, pre a lot of, the big boom of YA. So it's not that there wasn't any, but it wasn't just something that was as widely available. So then I kind of started reading more of that when I was a little bit older than
Hmm.
the actual target age group. And just there was so many interesting things happening in YA at the time, different ways of telling stories. And I just, as a reader, really gravitated towards that and kind of got stuck there. And so then after my sister passed away, and I just, had one of those, what am I doing with my life moments? I was like, I want to write a book. And my dad was like, okay, you're going to be a writer. He's a journalist. That's where he comes from. So he's
Oh,
like,
okay. So
you have
so
this
he
5 year
was
plan to be a
understanding then.
physical therapist. Like, what are you doing here? And he's like, well, why don't you write her a story? So that's kind of how the Elixir books came to be. So they're sort of like fantasy adventures for her in a lot of ways. And also they were like a really important morning tool for me too, to sort of, there's, they're not sad books necessarily. So they were just sort of a way for me to sort of mourn her and celebrate her at the same time, and also work through some of my own feelings. So that's kind of where I came from there. And then, the more I got a little older, the more I realized like when you're a young adult and you're a little younger than that, like those are like your formative years. Those are the things that we think back on, and they had an impact on our lives in a way that, like, as adults, things just don't have that same effect on you. So, as I started thinking more about, the role that literature plays in young people's lives, in addition to the things like music and other media, movies, TV shows, and that sort of fandom and that, I don't know, that feeling you get that you just don't get as an adult about things, and realizing that this is really important. It's
Yeah.
a really important time in somebody's life. And then as I started having my own kids, I started reading just so much to them.
Yeah.
Um, so then I started being like just really interested in picture books and the construction of them and how those kind of come together. So yeah, I think for me it started out as a reader and then just sort of, I mean, not to say I won't ever write for adults. Technically, my picture book, Mommy's Night Before Christmas, is really more for the moms than for the kids.
Mhm.
Um, but yeah, I got stuck in that place in a really positive and good way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I
Well,
remember
good.
my like as a kid, there were certain books that I read. There was I don't know if you guys ever heard, like I was really into fantasy, and I I got into Edgar Rice Burroughs, which obviously that's not YA, but it really resonated with me as a kid and my sense of adventure. Tarzan and the Red Man from Mars and those books, and then there was the Dragon Riders from Pern, which was like it was so I don't know. It was a great escape, to read these books. And then later on, and I don't know if these are considered YA, but like the S.E. Hinton books, Rumblefish, and That Was Then, This Is Now. Those were all like books that I could really, really relate to. So,
Yeah, like I guess the Outsiders, pretty much is credited with starting YA as its own separate genre. Because when I think back about books that have featured young adults that I like, they're the ones that they teach it in the Western literary canon, right? Like To Kill a Mockingbird, that's substantially YA character. Holden Caulfield was a teenager, so a lot of that stuff they just weren't considered YA, and they were also a lot shorter than what we consider a novel now. So
mhm.
it's interesting what readers expect now, and how that's transformed. Probably over the last 52 to 100 years. About whenever that stuff was coming out, um, and I think what's really interesting is that a good young adult story is also a good story for adults, right? Like the biggest fan base for most young adult books is actually adults, usually in their 20s and 30s and that kind of thing. Um,
Would you think that Huck?
so
Do you think
I
like Tom Sawyer and Huck Finn would be considered YA from back
yeah,
when they were written?
I mean, there's certainly coming of age and right?
Hmm.
So,
and
yeah.
so yeah, like that's what I was circling around. I completely forgot about all the Mark Twain's stuff. That's definitely and YA of course is not, we call it a genre, but it's really an audience, right? Because you have books for young adults and books for adults, and that's the audience. And then because you can have a YA thriller and YA horror, like the my friend Andrew J. Brandt. That's what he writes, and he started out writing for adults, and then eventually figured out that his deep emotions come from whenever he was young, and so it's easier for him to write stories that feature those kind of characters, because that's where the most tumultuous parts of his life happened, were whenever he was a young adult. So whenever he reaches down into himself for those emotions, they come out
Yeah,
with a voice of from probably like 12 to 15. That's generally where his stuff comes from. Me, I have that same, I have some younger characters, but they're always younger versions of the adult characters I'm writing about. So either in flashback or in remembrance and stuff like that. But almost all my books do have events and the tumult from whenever those kids are young. I just my voice has never been a young adult. Whenever I was in high school, I was the nerdy kid using the words that were meant for kids in college and stuff like that. So my author voice won't allow me, I don't think, to write YA. Even if I wrote a book with characters that were that age, it probably couldn't be classified
Yeah.
as that age group. And then Tanya had she read my mind. I was going to ask you, Troy. You're not known for narrating YA or books for younger audiences, but had you done that, and was there any difference between how you do it?
I've done some books that are fantasy based, but it's like you said, it's not so much. It's not so much that it was written for younger people. It was just fantasy based, but it's something that I can imagine that younger people could enjoy. Books about different worlds and different adventures of people. I would enjoy doing that. I think that maybe the style would be a little bit different, where I could get away with being more of a storyteller, and telling this story, as opposed to, like, most of the books that I do now are romance, and so there's always this POV, that POV, and and others, but they're all very character based stories, and not so much like based on a world that is being built. It's always the characters within that world.
Right.
But I would enjoy.
I want to say hi to Charles real quick. He's my boss. He's the publisher of Blue Handle Publishing and the founder of that company, and Book Puma Author Services, both of which I work for. He sent us some gifts, which is great, and some likes. And he is somebody who writes on a wide spectrum. He writes books aimed at all ages. And what's interesting is the latest book that he wrote, Purdue. He wrote that one. It's a little lighter. It's it's still for adults, but it's a little on the lighter side, because he was working on a book called French Journal, which is very, very dark about it, getting into the mind of a serial killer. So he definitely had to sort of give his brain a rest from being in that space. Even though all of Katie's books are aimed at a younger audience, picture books and YA are very, very different, both in terms of format and in terms of the headspace you're in. Do you like to, go for long periods of time in the same audience and then switch up, or do you finish one and then go to the opposite end of the spectrum to give your brain that sort of rest like that?
Yeah, I like kind of that palate cleanser. I get deep
That's
into
what.
one for a while, and then it's like, oh, I'm going to take a break, and I'm going to, sometimes I feel like I'm cheating on one project, and I'll just go work on a picture book for a few days. I like, I think my brain likes to move around a bit sometimes, so that helps keep my attention. And because also when you're publishing yourself, or even when you're working with a publisher, sometimes you're in different parts of processing a book, so you might be editing something. So I'm like, oh, maybe I'll go work on this picture book idea I had as sort of like a refresher or something different. But yeah, I like, it's terrible for marketing, but I do like to jump around and work in different age categories and also different genres sometimes. But you're right, it's very different
And
writing a picture book versus writing a young adult or even middle grade. There's different voice, there's different ways the stories come together. Picture books are a lot shorter, but are they easy? Definitely not. Um, you know, just you're having to fit an entire story arc, character development. Now you do have the pictures to help you with things like that, and also largely on setting, right? But you're fitting all that in a very tight word count and structure. So yeah.
That's an art. Yeah, it really is an art to fit a lot of information and story into a short format, and make it a the word is not wholesome. The word is a fulfilling, satisfying piece of work. That doesn't. It would be difficult for me to do that and not it's the temptation would be to just to say, okay, here's the beginning, and then here's the middle, and then here's the end, and cut to the chase, because you have just like very limited amount of time. It seems very difficult to do.
Yeah, and I don't write short stories for a lot of that same reason. Whenever I do, I have to like keep it really really short. Like if I have a feeling if I were to try to write a short story that was on the longer side, 7,000, 10,000 words, I would probably just end up saying, oh screw it, I'm just going to go ahead and expand this out into a novel.
Yeah.
But I find short stories to be some of the best reading experiences whenever I do read short stories. And you think about the lottery as being a real classic one. Like even though that is not a form that I do short stories, I would love to have just one that resonated with folks like the lottery did, like Shirley Jackson. But it's you have to come up with a concept that is so new and so unexpected and jarring for an audience, which is why the lottery did as well as it did. Um,
Didn't Stephen
so,
King
like
do a
a
book?
lot of that is. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Excuse me. Didn't Stephen King do a short story under Richard Bachman called The Lottery?
I
Or
am not sure. That I don't know.
it was a maybe it was called The Long Walk, but there was a movie made about it where like there was a lottery where you were allowed to participate in this long walk, and there were thousands of people who would start on the walk, and basically they just walked until there was only one person left walking, and then that one person would just live a life of luxury, and they would never have to worry about, they would have everything they ever wanted. But it was all, they were all chosen by lottery, but once they started walking, they couldn't stop. So if you stopped walking, you would be shot. um, and but it was all
That's a
done
great
by
concept for a story. I'll have to look
but
that up.
yeah,
Certainly.
all of the, like, some of my favorite short stories are the Stephen King writing as Richard Bachman, just because, I mean, they're all, there's so many. The Running Man was one, the Fog was another, there was The Raft, and all these stories, very short, but they were all like really, really impactful.
Well, and it's funny back when Stephen King and like especially Raymond Carver, I mean, and that's probably 60 years ago now, but that was a huge market. If you could write really good short stories and get them published in the New Yorker and Vanity Fair and in those sorts of places, those guys were celebrities for being able to do that back then, and Hollywood loved it because a short story, the screenwriters and the directors get to a lot of times even expand a little bit on the story rather than have to chop it up. And so I'm not sure if it would work that way anymore, because most of the great short story writers that I know, what happens is if they get notoriety for that, then the agents come to them and say, can you do you have a novel you're working on? Let's try to do that. There's
Oh,
nobody, and part of that is because the pay rate, the rates that magazines and other places pay for short stories has not gone up. And all right, so Tanya says it's called The Long Walk and was written by Christopher Larson. So thank you for that, Tanya. As always,
interesting.
yeah. If we don't have an answer, she looks them up, and that's always great.
Huh.
But so like back whenever they were writing, Raymond Carver and those guys, if they were going to get a story published and it was going to say pay $500, well, that was $500, in the 50s and 60s and 70s and all that stuff. And right now, $500 would be huge. It's more like two or three, and that's in today's money. So,
Hmm.
for some reason, the American reading public just does not appreciate short stories like they did, and part of that probably is because people don't pay for the magazine subscriptions like they used to, because
Yeah.
magazine subscriptions used to be cheaper. Everybody used to get two or three or four magazines a month, and that was the primary way that they got their entertainment. And now, I guess I'm not sure if the price of books have changed or what the difference is, but now whenever people want to read, they first think about a novel usually, and then they might explore all that other stuff.
Yeah.
Do you know much about the history of book narration, Troy? I know that I can still go to a Barnes and Noble and still get books on CD, even though I haven't used a CD in probably 10 or 15 years now. So,
Yeah.
but what how has that worked for you?
Oh, it's been fantastic for me. I know that when I first started, when I was first interested in reading audiobooks for a living, um, it was just impossible to, for somebody like me. I lived in Phoenix at the time, and this was in the early '90s. But if you didn't live in San Francisco or New York or Los Angeles or Chicago, you just didn't read audiobooks for a living. There was a very small, there's just a very short list of audiobook narrators, and all of the major publishers were the ones. They were the kind of the gatekeepers of audiobooks. And you're right. So it used to be, it was books on tape, and that was cassette tapes. And I remember my mom used to love audiobooks, and she well into, when they were already doing audiobooks on MP3. But my mom just refused to give up her Walkman and her cassettes. So she had she would get this case of cassettes, and read her audiobooks on cassettes. And so that was pretty much the way that it was for the longest period of time. And then CDs came along, and you could fit more information on CDs. And then Audible came along, and they started streaming the audiobooks. And now that's the way that it's going. But it wouldn't have been possible for me to do audiobooks if it weren't for the internet and for downloadable audiobooks. So,
Katie, have any of your books been turned into audiobooks, and what was that process like for you?
I have not had any turned into audiobooks yet. I really would love to do my middle grades. I have two middle grades because there's a big audience that the middle graders love the audiobooks. I, it's right now just a budget thing for me, and I've been really focusing on producing new work and trying to up my backlist for the moment. But yeah, and I just, now that I think about that, I can remember going to the library as a kid and getting the cassette tapes,
yeah.
of the books on cassette tape and listening to
Mhm.
them. And
Yeah.
I think I even had one, I think it was The Fox and the Hound, and it was like
Oh,
um an actual like vinyl album that we
oh, that's
listened
right.
to
Yeah.
on record.
Wow, that's cool.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, yeah, I mean, audiobooks have been around, but it's certainly a game changer.
Mhm.
People with their, do you have like a home studio you work out of?
Yeah. I'm in my studio right now. I'll show you the gist of it. So this is I can't really see. This is my microphone, and that's my monitors are dark right now, and I've got this light. I don't know. I have like I cannot figure out how to light myself without looking like I'm either in a crypt or or I'm in a tuberculosis ward, because I either look like in total shadow or totally pale. But yeah, so I've got my own home studio. A lot of people have their own. They build these little tiny booths that they can read in. Um, and I think that's the majority of the way that people do audiobooks now, is in their home studios. I mean, there are
Mhm.
some bigger studios out there that are still operating. Audible has their own studios, and there are studios where people read. But yeah, for the most part, we're doing our own thing. We do hire professional engineers and producers and mastering engineers to take what we do and clean it up and make it look pretty, or make it sound pretty. Um, but yeah, that's pretty much the way that that we're all doing it now.
we have a question from Samantha Brimmer, and she wants to know, Troy, do you find you concentrate more when it's darker whenever you're narrating? Is that something that you prefer to do?
Yeah. Yeah, when I'm doing my audio work, I dim my lights so that my focus is on my monitor. Um, when I'm reading from a Word document, there's a mode called focus, and it like blanks everything else out on the
Mm-hmm.
screen. And I have two monitors, and I turn one of my monitors off, so that I can simply focus on the words in front of me on an otherwise dark screen. But yeah, that's the way I like
I
to.
always for I always forget about focus mode in Word, and I need to use that more because that's what I write in. That's what I draft in as Word.
Yeah,
I've if I were to maybe with my tax refund, I don't know. I may look into. There's a thing called a free write, which is like a digital typewriter, and it doesn't allow you to really edit, which is something that I have trouble with because I edit a lot during my day job. So
yeah.
I find it hard to just like absolutely let loose and write. Been doing better with it now, though. Now that I know that that's becoming an actual, recurring thing for me. But yeah, that focus mode definitely helps. Katie, what do you draft your books in, and do you have any different softwares or different devices for, picture books versus your chapter books and your young adult novels?
Yeah, I definitely use different things. But speaking of free writes, so I have the old school Alpha Smart.
Mm.
So it's
Oh,
basically like the old version of the free write. So those were largely sold to
mm-hmm,
schools to teach kids keyboarding. So you
right.
can only get them secondhand now, but they're not. I mean, a free write's like several $100s, or you can pick
Yeah.
up, for $50, you can get an Alpha Smart. And
Mm.
they still support the tech. So if you have an issue with it, you can call them. So I got
Oh,
mine
cool.
secondhand, and it's like the little green screen, and you get about 5 lines,
Mm-hmm.
and you can scroll up to see, but
Yep.
no internet, nothing. I do if I'm fast drafting like a novel, I will often do it on the Alpha Smart. It runs on like AA batteries. They last super long, so I
Interesting.
can do it like in the car pickup line while I'm, waiting to get my kids for school and that kind of thing. It's super portable. Um, but I generally work in Scrivener for novels because I tend to do like I draft and edit by scenes. That's kind of my
Mm-hmm.
process. So Scrivener works really well for that. I used to work in Word, and then I tried Scrivener out, and I was like, oh, I love it. It was a game changer for me because just the way you can set it up all in scenes, and you can jump around,
Mm-hmm.
and it. I also format in Scrivener as well for my novels, so it just kind of all goes into there once. And the Alpha Smart, you can just plug it in, and then it can put it right into your whatever word processor you use on your computer. And then for picture books, I usually start out by hand. I usually get like an idea, and then I just like scribble in my notebook and start working out lines. And um, eventually, I will usually put it into a Word doc. And then I will
Mm-hmm.
sometimes print it out and then cut it out and create like a storyboard for it.
That's
Um,
pretty cool. So you
And,
draw your
yeah.
characters out, and then take it over to a graphic artist and say, "This is my idea. Can you flesh this out?" And
yeah, so usually I don't actually draw anything. I
yeah,
just have like it cut out and put in. And yeah, so I may have like some ideas about how a character looks, but I think one of my favorite things about working with an illustrator is, and this also really helps, this is one of like the big pieces of advice I give to like picture book writers is like, what are you leaving room for the illustrator? So like I want to
mhm,
know what the illustrator's vision of the characters are, unless there's something really important to like who the character is or something to the plot. Like I'm not going to give my illustrator a ton of instruction.
yeah,
I'm going to be like, you take your vision to it, and then we'll go from there. So usually they'll give you some sketches first, and then before anything's colored. But yeah, I always try to think of it in a way of what's the illustrator going to be able to add to this, and that also really helps with word count too, because you're not talking about what characters are wearing or what colors their eyes are. You don't
mhm,
need any of that description because you have pictures
yeah.
to tell that. So yeah, but yeah, I have definitely have different processes, but yeah, I'm a big fan of the Alpha Smart. So like yeah, the free write is kind of like the new fancier version of that.
Well,
But
I did not realize the Alpha Smart would even still work. So I will definitely look into that because yeah, significantly cheaper. And you know, with the you talking about leaving your artist room to have their vision whenever you're doing picture books. That sounds a lot like the difference between writing a novel and a screenplay, which is something that I think about sometimes and I dabble with. And for my job, we actually have a couple of screenwriters who we're helping out. And yeah, that's been the hard part. But the feedback I got, whenever I first, wrote my first couple of attempts at a screenplay, were that you definitely are novelists because you want to do a whole lot of the directing, and it's like there's a guy called a director that eventually he's going to do all that stuff. And like you don't put in what your characters look like, their nationality, unless it's central to the story. So like that's interesting, for me as a novelist to learn. Like, in essentially you're writing a novel, you are the director and you control the entire world. But when you collaborate with someone who's doing other things visually, like you would do either with a movie or with a picture book, yeah, you have to allow them to have their vision too because it's a collaboration. And I know that with the one audiobook I did, the voice actor contacted me and said, "Hey, how do you hear these characters and all that stuff?" And that was definitely one where I was like, I want to hear what you think and how you hear these characters whenever you're reading it, because I didn't really think about it that way whenever I'm writing. It was my debut, so I hadn't thought about it. And then also, I wanted to see if it was going to be their audiobook. I wanted to see what their interpretation was going to be. I think Tanya would like for me to ask Katie where you got the idea for Elixir, because I know that is definitely one of your more popular works and one that you're known for.
Yeah, so again, that I mentioned, my sister, and I kind of wanted to write like a fantasy adventure for her. So the first Elixir book, I kind of wanted to be like a There Back Again tale, sort of like The Hobbit, as a precursor to maybe a bigger, more epic story, a la The Lord of the Rings. Um, and at the time, wasn't when I first started, I didn't even realize it was going to be young adult. I was just writing characters and creating this world and throwing a lot of my favorite weird ideas in there about, creatures and things that show up in there. And originally, the intention was to take the character who's Kylene, who's named after my sister, and have it be from her point of view. I was just not in a place to be able to do that for the first book. So it became her sister. That is the character, that's from her point of view. Um, and there, I mean, some wish fulfillment certainly in there because the main character is just finding out that she's a guardian of a secret healing elixir. So what I would not have done for something like that, and not in necessarily making those choices intentionally, just sort of being very green as a novelist, never having written a novel before, I started it when I was still in college. And, just sort of started writing sort of from inside of me, and then took this really great adventure. And then for the second book, it's 3 characters, different points of views, and they go in different directions. And one of them is the Kylene character. I finally, because this was many years later, felt comfortable writing. It's not her. It's a character based on her, but feeling like I could do her voice justice and have enough space from that where it was still hard to write in a lot of ways. It took me a very long time to write both of those books because they are very emotional for me. But yeah, I just really wanted something really imaginative and fun and about family and found family. And, when you have a power, but maybe you don't have full control of it, what are you going to do with that? Are you going to take that power on or with its limitations? Are you just going to say, let it be what it be? And if it falls into the wrong hands, so be it. And really very much less about the the destination and very much about the journey in that first book.
Would you say that that's your most successful book to date, that Elixir?
It's certainly, I mean, it's won an award. It's certainly like the most decorated. It was my first book, and it was first published by a publishing company. And then after a while, when I was thinking about what I wanted to do with the second book, I ended up taking my rights back and publishing myself. And that's when it went and won the award after I published it myself. I'd say probably my most popular best-selling book right now is my Pirate Island book, which is middle grade. And that has a very local tie-in to where I'm from with real Captain Kidd's legends of the real pirate. And I do lots of pirate talks in the area, and that's sort of the one that's like constantly like just slowly churning along. Certainly Elixir Bound has had its high points. That one tends to be more up and down, and it's my oldest one, too. But yeah, those two are definitely probably right now the most well-known ones, I'd say.
Yeah, it's funny when you have success early on in what you were doing, and yeah, I remember I had when I first started getting into reading audiobooks, I did a series for a horror author, and it was a bestseller, and I just kind of assumed, I just thought, oh, okay, so this is what I'm going to be doing. I'm just going to be doing bestsellers, from this point forward, and it was another few years before I got to participate in a book like that, that was that successful. But as I looked back, I thought, boy, I really should have appreciated how much, how well the book did, and how, because I had no frame of reference, I just kind of assumed, okay, so they're all going to be this successful, and they're not. It's kind of like, I remember when I lived in Phoenix, there was the baseball expansion team came in, and they went to the playoffs first year, and one of the owner of the baseball team was interviewed 5-10 years later, and they asked him specifically about his debut season, and he said, yeah, I just kind of thought, oh, this is what we're going to be doing. We're always going to be making it to the playoffs. I had no idea how hard it was going to be to get back to that place. So it's kind of funny.
And
Go ahead.
I was going to say, yeah, I think anyone who tries to make a career in the arts, whether it's your main source of income, or even if you're just doing it for passion, but if you're going to stay in it, then yeah, it's tough to remember that there are going to be a lot of ups and a lot of downs. There's not a whole lot of stability and baseline whenever you're doing this sort of thing, until you go through some of those ups and downs, and then you're able to really find a groove. And that doesn't happen for novelists a lot of times till book 5 or 6 or something like that. And they're going through, and you usually have an outlier on both ends. You have one that really doesn't do very well, and then you have one that does extremely well, and then you finally figure out, okay, so this these other ones are more like what it's going to be, and that's kind of where the middle is, and then you start realizing, okay, if I can just get to that level, then I know that everything's okay. I don't have to have a bestseller every time or anything like that.
Yeah.
So the Katie, you talked about getting your rights back to that book. Talk to us a little bit about the differences between going through traditional publishing for Elixir, and then what you did when you did eventually get those rights back, because that happens to more authors than I think a lot of readers realize. And a lot of authors don't do anything if they get their rights back, because they don't want to pursue indie publishing. So talk us through kind of how that process went for you.
Yeah, so I mean, it was my first book that was ever published. So, coming from that perspective, I think having a publisher and going through the editorial process, and, having someone to sort of help you through all that the first time around. And this is also, let's see, the book came out in 2011. So, there wasn't the tools we have now for self-publishing back then either. So I think I needed to go through that process as a publisher, because I learned so much. And I do have an editorial background. So even coming from like something of an editorial background, to still kind of work with professionals and go through that process, and have that validation, if someone's saying this book is good enough to be published, was a really important part and step in my career. And then I just got to a point where I had ended up self-publishing Pirate Island, my middle grade, and I loved it. It was like just exciting, and I was so in control of the process. And I was like, hmm. And then, my slow process of writing the second Elixir book, I started thinking like, maybe I could do these on my own. So I was at a point in my contract where I could just sort of nicely ask for the rights back. Because for the part of the contract, a lot of contracts will have, your publisher has right of first refusal um, for books, especially in that world or in that
Yeah.
same age category and genre. So I was like, do I want to offer that book up to them first, the sequel? And I was like, no, I think I want to try it on my own. And so, yeah, I just was able to sort of politely ask for my rights back because I was at a point in my contract where that was available, and they granted them. So I had to, get a new cover because I didn't have the rights for the old cover, which was fine
Hmm.
because it was sort of ready for a rebrand. And then just sort of took it from there. And sort of have never looked back. I mean, I've certainly queried since then. I've never had an agent that I've worked with because I think different books, and because I do work in different age categories and genres, maybe I'm like, oh, this maybe suits the traditional market. But really over the last year or two, I've just been like much more committed to the self-publishing route. And my goal has always been to sort of scale up my own business. And I have three kids. They're 11, 8, and 5. So the last 12 years of my life have largely been very focused on raising my kids. So it has been a slow go, and that's not good for business. When you're releasing a book every 2 years. Um,
Mhm. Well, you get better as you get better, and uh, the mystique of publishing is, you with practice and experience, you learn, okay, I can do that. And oh, I can do this as well. And you realize that, all of these things that you used to depend on publishers to do, you can do yourself. And more tools develop for the independent author that make it so that you don't have to depend on you know on other people. You can do it yourself. It's just
or you
it's
can
it's
you can
difficult,
like source your own people, that
right?
you want to work with too. And I just want to give a shout out to my friend Caitlin Duncan. She's one of my writing partners. She wrote a book, Take Back Your Book, it's called, and
Hmm.
it's all about rights reversion. So if you're looking to sort of do a deeper dig and that kind of thing, if that's something that is the situation you find yourself in, thinking about, or you're finding yourself, where your rights are being reverted back to you.
Hmm.
Yeah, she's a good book about that.
Nice.
That's pretty cool, because that's really down in the weeds with publishing. But yeah, through Blue Handle Publishing, whenever we work on our contracts, it's always interesting, and it's interesting what the authors, what questions they have. We have an author now who's gathering up her questions because she's unagented, and I know that in my contracts, basically, if the book stops selling, the publisher can say, hey, we're going to give you your rights back because, it's not working for us. Your book isn't profitable, so we don't want to keep it. Or I can buy the rights back, and it's something crazy like 48 times my best ever, payment period. So I
Wow.
mean, yeah, that would be a pretty substantial commitment for me if I were to want to do that. And then of course, they have the sales rights for the length of the copyright, and that's based on a model for major publishing, even though my publishers are both smaller independents. Um, but so if you said you were at a place in your contract where you could just politely ask for them back, I wonder, without divulging anything you don't want to, like, how is your contract structured where you're able to do that? Because I think if I went to my publishers now, one of them might be like, well, your books aren't selling very well, we don't care. But another one would be like, no, no, thanks. We're going to go ahead and keep those sales rights. How did your contract work where that was a possibility for you?
I think I just kind of got lucky. I did have an agent look over the contract when I was negotiating it. I was an agent I had, I had a connection with through past querying, and I had kind of said, "Can you take a look at this?" And it was a fairly simple contract, and I think it was just because it was a smaller house I was dealing with that it was more straightforward. So there wasn't a lot of, different rights issues and lots of, sort of that more publishing jargon in it. I think it was just very straightforward. Um, and I think that was just happened to be the company I worked for because I do have another book, a picture book, The Bedtime Night, that was published as an ebook as in part of an app first. And that contract was very complicated. And like, if I wanted to publish it in any other format, I would have had to pay them royalties, but they weren't interested
Hmm.
in publishing it in any other format themselves. And eventually they got bought out by another company. And then when we got offered the new contract, they wanted to basically lease the work for 3 years for like $50 a year. And I was like, it's not really worth it to me. And I didn't do anything with that book for a long time because it was a matter of illustrations. And they had hired an illustrator to do the illustrations.
Hmm. Yeah.
And then I eventually contacted her and I was like, hey, can we make a deal here where I could get the rights to use this to create a book out of it? And we came to an agreement. But yeah, I think it's really tricky. Contracts in publishing can be really tricky because there's lots of different clauses and, different rights, you can be giving to them or not giving, obviously, because they're giving you money for it. But yeah, there's lots of different rights. And when you talk about like, do they have the audiobook rights? Do they have foreign rights, foreign language rights? What are the rights? So I think that's why it's important, to have someone who knows what they're doing take a look at your contract,
Yeah.
to try to, and I did try to negotiate with the picture book people, the contract, and they just didn't want to negotiate with me at all. And it was a really hard
Hmm.
decision to walk away from like, okay, it wasn't a ton of money, but it was some money in my pocket, and it was still a book that was going to be published where I said no, and then it just wasn't published for a long time. So
So
yeah, there's lots of decisions to be made.
out of curiosity, what does a publisher bring to the table? I know I know this might
So
I mean that might be a naive question, but in today's day and age, when you can pretty
mhm.
much do everything yourself, what does a publisher do that you can't?
It depends. It depends on which publisher you're working with. For me, the reason that I sought traditional publishing for my books was because I did not know about covers and formatting and uploading to vendors and stuff, and I had no interest in learning that. I wanted to write, so I said if I can find somebody who's willing to do that for me and to where I don't have to pay for it, then that's going to be a really great deal for me, even though I won't be making as much money. And I also didn't have as much disposable income. Well, I've never had a whole lot of disposable income, but that and I didn't want to run my own small business. I was working full time as a journalist, as an editor, managing editor at the time. So my time was limited. If I could do the writing, that's what I wanted to do. And so, yeah, having someone to defray that cost, even though I was only going to get back a fraction of the royalties, that was appealing to me. Um, but other things, publishers, depending on the publishers, and Charles is in here. He's, he runs Blue Handle Publishing. So yeah, like, we pay for our books to be entered into awards, and a lot of awards will only recognize if it has been published, by a publisher, not indie published. And a lot of it is distribution and marketing. And I would say that, we're very choosy with our books. Other publishers, one that I work with, they probably publish 2 or 3 books a week, 365 days a year. We at Blue Handle know that we're making an investment in the author, and because it takes a few $1,000s just to create a book, even if you're not doing any ads or anything like that, to get the proper cover, to get the proper editing, and all that stuff. So we're making that investment, and one thing that most publishers work on, and we're working on it right now, is distribution and exposure for the author. Their distribution partners you can try to sign up with. Ingram Spark, gets you in the Ingram distribution, and that gets you in the bookstores and stuff. But there's different groups like IPG and other ones where they can help get your books into more bookstores without you, the author, having to just call up every Barnes and Noble in the country saying, "Hey, I have this book." And then we also pay to put our books on NetGalley. We pay to put the books on Edelweiss to get early reviews and to get them, especially for Edelweiss, to get them out to booksellers where they can download and read, and then order from that website and get them into their bookstores. So that's a big that's a big part of it. And I think it's really important for authors if they want to go with a traditional publisher. And we talk to authors and do author coaching a lot too. It's all about what your end game is. If you want to have as much distribution as you can, if you want a lot of marketing help, and if you want to get into a lot of brick and mortar bookstores, then going with a publisher is going to be an easier road to hoe, and it's going to be less expensive. But if you want to have a lot of creative control and you want to reap as much of the profit as possible, if you're willing to put in that initial investment, then indie publishing is a great way to go. And what Charles is saying is absolutely right. There are so many different ways to skin this cat now that there is no wrong answer. It's about asking all the right questions and getting all of the right information so that you can choose the right path for you, whether it's traditional publishing, whether or not it's waiting to get an agent and going for a really big publishing deal at a big five, whether or not it's independently publishing. I don't ever recommend hybrid publishing, which is its own weird thing where you pay for the services up front and they take royalties on the back end. That's that's a scam. And so we do provide services for people who want to independently publish their books, and we oftentimes have to tell people that no, you pay us the fee, we get your book out there, and then you keep all the royalties, because there was like a market that emerged whenever independent publishing became a thing, where people were trying to get it on both ends, and we actually have to fight off that stigma a little bit with Book Puma Author Services. I wanted to ask you, Troy, have you worked both with publishers and with independent creators to do your narration, and what differences have you seen with those two paths in the narration world?
Yeah, definitely. I work as so I have my own company, and I do full production of audiobooks through my company, Speed of Sound. But independent authors can come to me and say, I know nothing about creating an audiobook. Can you help me? And I can walk them from A to Z. I also work with some of the bigger, bigger publishers, Audible Studios, Podium, and some of those bigger guys. The experience is, and it's just like you said, there's the trade-offs depending on what you want to do. So when I'm working for a bigger publisher, all I do is I read the audio, I take it to, I send it off to them. They take care of all of the mastering, all of the formatting, all of the production. And but when I take it in-house, when I'm working directly with an author, then I do everything, script prep, all of the research into, I would reach out to you and say, hey, what are your thoughts on your characters? Do you have thoughts? Do you have preferences, accents, things along those lines? It's a much more involved. You get to know me a lot better when we're working together and I'm producing your book for you. So it's yeah, and both are fun because there are some that I can get through a book in a couple of days, but with others, when I'm working to produce the audiobook myself, it's pretty cool because I get to work with other narrators and talk to them about their deliveries, and we get to shape our characters together and bounce off of each other. So it's it's pretty cool. I mean, it's kind of an adventure. It's really neat working with authors because you have the story and it's already done. You're just taking the story and creating something new with it. This audio experience, and so it becomes this brand new collaboration, um, which is hopefully easy for you as an author, just because I mean you know the story, so I'm coming to you asking for direction. But it's I think it's fun. I think it's really cool to work with an author who gets to who can who comes back at the other side of the story when they're listening to it. And my goal is for them to say, uh, wow, the book sounds as good as the story sounded in my head. So
That's cool.
yeah, it is
Yeah.
pretty cool. I mean, it's really neat. It's like it's an easy job for me because like you put all the work into it. You put the blood, sweat, and tears into developing your characters and the stories and all that stuff, and all I have to do is read it. So it's it's kind of fun for me. I get to I already have something to work from where you guys have to like just make it up out of your imagination. So
Yeah. So we're coming up on the top of the hour, so I'm going to kind of reset a little bit. Charles is sending his gifts, and thank you so much. And I know he said he's got to get back to writing and editing because he has like a lot of us do. He has more than one full-time job that he does, and so then he goes and he writes and edits at night. But thank you for the gifts, Charles, and everybody else. I know we got some Christmas lights earlier. We've got over 4,000 likes, and so that's great. That helps us get that helps push our live out there to people and let them know that we're talking. We have Troy Duncan, who's a voice actor, as his name implies, and then author Katie Carroll with us. We're talking about books. We're talking about audiobooks, and I think I want to switch gears a little bit now and talk about, because Troy, you were talking about how we make up the stories and sort of that magic that happens with writing. And Katie, you gave us the incredible story about where your first books came from, and it was very cathartic like that. But you said you didn't do it on purpose, and whenever you said that, I definitely, I was over here nodding because, that's sort of the magic, isn't it? Where you take the things that have happened in your life, and your brain, for creative people like us, they are able to reorganize it, repackage it, and then put it out into a completely different world, and everything is fictionalized. Um, Whenever you were writing Elixir, did you feel that catharsis as you were writing, or did it take a while? And did you have to step back and then realize what writing that book did for you to help overcome that traumatic period in your life?
So I think because it did take me quite a few years to even write like a draft that was good in some ways, but not good in other ways. And the moment I finished it, I had a very big rush of emotion that I was not expecting. I'm not the type of person who shows particularly sad emotions outwardly very easily. So when I started actually physically crying when I was like the end on that book, I was very surprised with myself. So I think I had that very big rush of emotion right at the end of just like finishing and then realizing I've done this thing that's really amazing. Because I think sometimes we forget the farther along we're in the process, like just finishing a book is amazing, right? And then
Yep.
I did
Yep.
this thing, that I had been working towards and in memory of my sister, and it was this big rush of emotions. And it wasn't until much later, I think when I started writing the second book more, that I sort of was able to have that time, both time away from the book and time to sort of have better processed my sister's death, that I realized what that book did for me emotionally. It was not in the moment that I realized all these sort of not healing the wounds, but just helping me work through them. But yes, certainly not in the moment. I don't think that was something that I really even realized it was doing for me.
Gotcha. And of course, one thing that the cliche is they tell authors they should write what they know, and there's some truth to that. I definitely use real situations sometimes in crime fiction because I was a reporter and I covered crime and that sort of thing. So there is some truth to that, but the bigger truth, whenever people say write what you know, what about people who write about fantasy? Well, they're writing the emotional truths, that kind of live inside them, and digging those out is really the magic and the hardest part of writing a novel that really resonates with people. And so, whenever I was in a critique group with some folks who have hit some of the bestseller lists and who were really really good at their craft, and that was early on the thing they always had to tell me. They're like, you write really good one liners. Your plot is great. Plot is my strength. They're like, but you're not digging deep enough with these characters, and you also have to do that while not info dumping, right? And so, but that was the thing that they really made me realize that I had to go down and find those emotional truths and put them into the characters. Now, some people it sounds like you were just able to do that, as you were writing, whereas I have to consciously make sure that I am putting that into my characters, even if I kind of know it's there. I have to make sure that it makes it onto the page. One thing I wanted to ask you, Troy, too, is whenever you're narrating a book, you can probably tell whenever an author has done that, whenever that they are really kind of spilling their guts out, through these characters. Is that something that you take into consideration consciously as you're making choices with how to narrate a book? And have you ever asked an author, what was going through their mind when they wrote a particular scene or anything like that?
I've asked an author if they did it. I've asked an author, you wrote this killer a little bit too convincingly. Tell me more about your process. But I haven't met an author who actually killed anybody yet. But I
That
have
you know about.
that I know. That, yes, like they might say, oh well, I mean, just an idea. But well, so I was going to ask you about that too. With your background in reporting crime stories, have you ever said to yourself, well, you know what, this guy, he didn't get away with it, but I know how he could have, and ever incorporate that into your story?
Yeah, so let the guilty pay, and I had later on after I published it, the reporter who worked on the story asked me point blank, "Is this based in part on so and so?" And I said, "Yes, it is," and I think that's very cool that you saw that. So there's a guy named Hank Skinner who he was going through the appeals process. He's on death row still, I think, but he was going through a lot of the appeals process whenever I was working at the Amarillo Globe News, and whenever I was filling in different editor positions there. And he has always maintained his innocence, but basically he claims he woke up and his living girlfriend and two sons were like brutally slain, like right out of a horror movie, right?
Hmm.
And so, but he was there, had the blood on him, and all that stuff, and like he was claiming to have been drugged because he was a hard drinker, so it had taken a lot for him to black out. So. He says somebody must have set me up. I don't know how this happened. They drugged me, and it was a New Year's Eve party. I believe that was a holiday, so there were people coming and going.
Hmm.
But anyway, it's a real complicated case and all that stuff. And so what I did is that case always intrigued me. So I said, uh, what is there a scenario by which he could even be telling the truth, right? Like what if I said, okay, everybody thinks he's guilty, he's on death row, but I could tell the story of how it actually unfolded. And while I definitely strayed away from a lot of the facts, and that happened naturally,
Hmm.
because I didn't want to. I didn't want to make it too much true crime. That's not really what not necessarily what I was going for. Even though one of the main characters is a true crime writer who wrote a book based on that, but he lied, and that's the unreliable narrator part of it. But that was definitely one of the seeds that started that whole one of the timelines of that whole book was. I wonder, if you really didn't do it, how crazy would that and complicated would that have to be? And so that got my brain going. So I didn't necessarily directly base it on that, but yeah, I definitely take a lot of the stuff that I think about and try to read between the lines of the facts that are brought out that are borne out during a case and what I think could have happened. And I try to let it extrapolate a lot further from there, both because I don't want to write somebody's dark secrets, and if I'm right, like how crazy would that be? But also because it is fiction, so I want it to come from a place of storytelling and not having to stick to those facts, right? Because as a journalist, if I wanted to do true crime, then that's actually an easier leap, right? To take a really sensationalized, complicated case and then just expand the reporting into a book. But making up the facts is a lot easier, quite frankly, than trying to make sure you get it right. And then also, yeah, using storytelling structure and stuff. There's definitely there's a reason why Hollywood does based on true stories, and they don't stick 100% to the facts because that's not good storytelling, and that's not what readers want. It's funny talking about that kind of stuff, and then I'm not sure, Katie, in any of your books, is there any death or anything like that that you would have to draw from any real life experiences like that?
I mean, there's definitely some death in some of my books.
Well, because you read about the pirate stuff. Surely there's some pretty crazy stuff going on there.
Yeah, I mean, so that's middle grade. So, a lot of stuff you don't put on the page for middle grade.
Yeah,
And it's
that would be
so it's
tough for you.
yeah. I mean, you could deal with hard topics, and that's important. But for that book, he is sort of channeling Captain Kidd's ghost, so he is like a modern day kid. So all the history is all history at this point. But he does sort of grapple with the idea of like, I'm finding my bravery by acting like a real pirate, but do I want to be like a real pirate? Because was this person like a good person
Mm-hmm.
in real life? But in the epic fantasies, there's the second Elixir book, there's a big battle, and there are deaths. I think one thing that I do come back to a lot, and not necessarily in everything I write, is that different types of mourning. Um, and, when you have a grief in your life, how that morphs and changes and sort of the wave of it, and dealing with grief at different places. That's, I think, a theme I've come back to a lot.
What was your
But not,
fascination with?
go
I'm sorry.
ahead.
Go ahead.
I would say, but not like, not anything, certainly not any like true crime type of stuff that I've sort of worked in.
Well, what was your fascination with Captain Kidd?
So
And was it like
yeah.
part of a more uh, full fascination with pirates?
So not necessarily pirates. There's a lot of local Captain Kidd legend here from where
Mm-hmm.
I'm from in Connecticut.
Mm-hmm.
He actually sailed in Long Island Sound with supposedly a large amount of treasure while he was a wanted man.
Mm-hmm.
And there was some buried on Long Island that was found while he was still alive. And there's a lot of missing treasure. There's a lot of treasure that he had that has never been found. And where is all that treasure? And there's a small island. It's really cool because it has we call it a sandbar.
Mm-hmm.
Um, at low tide, you can walk out to the island.
Oh, cool.
And there was a letter that put Captain Kidd in town at one point, which may or may not be real. So there's sort of this local fascination with Captain Kidd himself. And supposedly that island, and it's only like 14 acres, so it's quite small, has been cursed 3 times, one by like a Mexican emperor and also Captain Kidd. And then it ties into our local Native history as well, because it originally was Native Americans who owned all this land. Well, they didn't own it,
Mm-hmm.
but they inhabited the land.
Mm-hmm.
And that was sort of a summer place for the natives, was the island. And they supposedly have cursed it as well. So there's this huge local, and my dad, he was a journalist and had written about it in the local newspapers. And it's sort of one of those perennial topics around here that just comes up. So Captain Kidd is definitely, we have a pirate day in town every year. And the pirates come in on the boat in the
Mm-hmm.
harbor. And we have a local personality He's on the library board with me, and he dresses up as Captain Kidd. He plays the part of Captain Kidd at a lot of different events. So that's kind of where the
Huh.
Captain Kidd stuff came from. That was very inspired by real history and legends locally. And then I read a bunch of real, books about him and his life, and it's just fascinating. And pirates in general are fascinating, and for kids,
Mhm.
but that's really where that idea came from, was the local history. That was fascinating to me.
So So it sounds like you actually, do have to do research and stick to true things that happened, whenever you write those stories. So even though it's sort of a middle grade pirate adventure sort of a story, you still have to do a lot of research, and so that's something I think a lot of people take for granted with certain genres. That you don't have to do as much research as say somebody who is like as Tanya pointed out in the comments, trying to figure out how best ways to kill people and how to hide bodies and all this stuff, or for my
Mhm.
action thriller, how do the different military branches work and the different units within there, and getting that sort of lingo and all that stuff right to make it authentic. But for middle grade and even middle grade sort of pirate adventure stuff, or probably for your fantasy stuff too, there's a lot of research that you have to do. What do you think is some of the hardest research you've had to do that maybe wouldn't seem obvious to somebody who's just reading your book?
Yeah, so I think like for fantasy, I think just like because you're building a whole world, so you really have to like grapple with all the aspects of like what makes a society. So a government system, some sort of monetary or trade system, um, what what kind of like religion do they practice?
Hmm.
Whether you call it a religion or not. So you have to think of all these different facets of a society and what makes that up. And how does that fit into your story? Because when you're building a world that doesn't act like our world, there are these
Oh,
societal structures and rules. And also regarding, you know, gender and race and lots of things that it can snowball on you really easily.
I bet. I bet
Um,
that would be really complicated. But the cool thing about it for you would be, yeah, I mean, and I'm not familiar with your books, but have you ever created this world or this society that that is kind of like your imagination of what would be better than what we have right now? Like, have you done that? Because
yeah,
that
so
would be fascinating to me.
I think for the Elixir books, I wanted to create almost like a softer world, I want to
Hmm.
say in some ways. I'm not sure if that's the right word. Where like it's almost like okay, so there's still high stakes, there's still dangers.
Hmm.
But I don't know, it's almost in a lot of ways like a kinder world in some ways.
Hmm.
That I really very wanted to like capture that sort of essence of that world. So there's these higher beings, and they're sort of like godlike creatures
Hmm.
Mm-hmm.
that are immortal, and then Mother Nature is sort of like the highest one.
Hmm.
So they sort of rule over the world, but in a very sort of like
Benevolent
uh,
way.
well, benevolent, but
Mm-hmm.
also like uncaring in some ways because they're just sort of
Ah.
absent a lot of the time, because their
Hmm.
concept of time is very different, and then some of them are more like meddlesome and gray area,
Hmm.
um, that kind of are like, well, I want to get mine too, I want the power.
Hmm.
So I think, yeah, I mean, I definitely played around with what would I want the world to look like in some ways,
Hmm.
without making it, without any stakes as well. You have to have that tension and
Yeah.
that as well. But yeah.
Yeah, human
Yeah.
nature always gets in the way.
Yeah, I mean, and
So it's
that's
such a very
yeah, that's universal, right?
yeah.
Yeah. But I mean, what would a
Mm-hmm.
good story be without human nature? Without protagonists and antagonists and tension and friction and competing interests. I mean, it wouldn't be interesting, right? Like if.
Yeah. Well, yeah. Conflict is what drives all story. And
Mhm.
whenever I was listening to you talking about your world, it's just so very different than what I do in crime fiction and what horror people do. Because we're looking at the world and saying, okay, how terrible can I make it for my cast of characters? And that is how we get our conflict and how we get our tension. Is we are always trying to make things worse.
Worse.
And I don't know what that says. And of course, some of that comes from I'm a little bit nihilistic by nature, but then working in newspapers, and that's where you report on a lot of times the worst and the best of people, right? So you're reporting on all the terrible things people do, and then you also report on the people who are heroic, and so that definitely shaped my worldview. So I definitely operate from the standpoint of anybody is capable of doing the worst that we can imagine people doing, given the right circumstances, and then so my job is to say create an environment where those circumstances can exist. I come from the Texas Panhandle, which used to be right in the middle of Tornado Alley. That's definitely shifted more toward the Deep South. But that's kind of the terminology they use is the conditions right now, whenever they're doing like a tornado watch or a tornado warning, the conditions are ripe for a tornado to happen. And so when I'm thinking about my characters and about my world, that's what I'm looking at. I'm trying to create an environment for a tornado to occur, and then that tornado is you have some funnel clouds forming throughout the whole process, and that tornado drops into conflict. So
Would
I
you
always
say
love
that
talking to
they
people who write in different genres.
would you say that that's a that those tornadoes that drop into your stories, are they events that reveal characters
Yes.
of your characters? Yeah.
So I actually wrote a blog post about this the other day because I was thinking about it for the Blackbird Writers. They're kind of a marketing group that I'm a part of different authors who write crime fiction. But so it used to be I would try to come up with a plot that would reveal character. And I've decided to try this, and I think it's a better strategy for long-term success in writing books. And Katie, you can weigh in after I talk about this because you may have already figured that out. But I'm trying to write the characters,
She was hoping you
and
wouldn't
then
notice, she'd have less competition. But go
yeah,
ahead.
yeah, no, that to focus on writing and developing really good characters, especially in the first act of the book, and then once I figure out who they are, then they're going to let me know what secrets they're keeping, and how they're going to end up. Having terrible things, doing terrible things, some of them, and some of them how they're going to react to that. And so I've switched my thinking around to where now I want to create these really dynamic characters who have really strong drives, and then see how they interact with each other, and that's going to inform the plot. Whereas my first few novels, and I think a lot of it is because I was a reporter, so I had a lot of true events I could come up with, and because I was taught to write, as succinctly as possible what happened, and so the characters were real people, so I didn't have to describe them and get into their desires as much because they were real people that you could research, and I didn't have to do all that in the confines of a news story. I wasn't creating them out of thin air; they existed, and so because that's how I what I did for so long, and that was how I developed my skills as a writer, was doing it that way. That's definitely the first few novels. That is absolutely how I went about it. And I've gotten a lot of good compliments on my plots, and people have enjoyed those. They've enjoyed the twists, but I never got a whole lot of comments on people liking the characters. In fact, I write on the darker side, so a lot of times they were like, you wrote pretty unlikable characters, but man, what a great story, And so now I definitely want to, and I've been getting compliments on my work in progress on, I love these characters and I can't wait to see what they do next. And I think that that's going to be better for me long term to write more novels, more successful novels, maybe write a series that can actually sustain more than one sequel that, is definitely the low point. We talked about high points and low points. That's definitely one that has not done as well. And I know exactly why, and it's nobody's fault. It just is what it is. And then Tanya points this out when we're talking about characters that they're based off of real people. They're definitely an amalgamation of people that we meet, and we pick up character traits like if we met someone who had like a some kind of idiosyncrasy, we can put those into those characters, and that does make them feel more real. And Katie, whenever you're crafting your stories, how do you approach it? And has has it changed like it did for me, taking one approach and then realizing another approach to the craft of writing would actually be better for you?
So the Elixir books, a lot of those characters are loosely based off of real people that I know. So again, I sort of had these built-in characters already for that story. So I didn't have to do as much like deep digging into character because I sort of already knew them in a lot of ways. So I think that was a struggle for me in some of my later books, was to figure out how to discover the characters. Because I don't know. I'm a discovery writer, so sometimes the plot is driving me because I usually know the end point, or at least the climax of the story as I'm going into it. I sort of know where I'm building to. So everything's working up to that. Um, and I've sort of embraced that chaotic process of pantsing, some people call it, um, of just sort of channeling the story and the characters and just getting words on the page. And it's not until I'm generally done with the draft that I really start to know who my character is. So character motivation in a draft is not always a good driver for me because I don't always know their motivation until after I'm done with the draft. And then I have to go in and do the revision work. And it's usually there to a certain degree, but I have to sort of hone it and dig deeper and bring it out more. The character themselves. So I think too early on, aside from those Elixir characters that were already very formed in my mind, it was definitely like it's a digging process for me to sort of discover who these characters are. And again, sometimes that means they react different than I expect them to as I'm going along. And they surprise you, which is always kind of fun. But then you're like, oh no, that's not what I foresaw here. Um,
Yeah.
so yeah, I think, and I think that's what brings people back to stories is, yeah, I love when stuff happens in a story. For me, I do like things happening in a story, and plot. I like a good twisty, interesting plot, no matter what the genre. But I think for a lot of people, it's the characters that bring them back to stories. So
Yeah.
yeah.
And that was the thesis of the post that I did, and so I think I had done it, and this is the first time I'm trying so this inverted way that I'm writing. I had definitely done it your way, and yes, going back in and after I have the story sort of drafted, going in and filling that stuff in and honing the characters' individual voices and their motivations and stuff. And it's definitely a lot faster process than what I'm doing right now. But I think it'll be interesting for me to see if I do this, and then people always talk about cutting scenes and stuff like that. I've never had that problem. I always have to go in and fill in, and my word counts are short. It'll be interesting to see if I have to go in and do that and actually cut entire scenes or entire characters or anything like that. But it is going much slower than it had in the past, which right now I haven't been under contract for a while, so it's nice. Been able to take that time, got a new job, and learning all that stuff. But I need to get back to where I'm able to do this faster, and I realize that about myself now. So the new year is a good time to start new stuff. So I'm gonna start with some different writing times and different priorities and things like that. And but I still am definitely going to, as I'm writing every scene, I'm going to focus on who the characters are and how they're interacting and that sort of stuff, and then see where the plot takes me. Now, you talked about having an endpoint in mind. I generally that just happens. I don't try to. I'm like, okay, how's this book going to end? I just see it, and I have seen that now finally with this story. So I do finally know where I'm going, and that always makes me feel better. But I definitely don't have any of the middle, like not even major plot points. Whereas usually by this time, approaching the end of the first act, I usually sort of have an idea of how I'm going to get there. But this time, I still, have like 4 or 5 or 6 different ways I can see it going. So it's interesting trying a new process, but it's a little bit scary because I kind of have to wonder, am I going to be able to do this novel this way since I haven't done it like that before at all. Troy, you have not said anything in a while, so I'm going to see if you had any questions you wanted to ask us as you've been listening to us nerd out about the writing process. And I know
Yeah,
that
no,
that's you don't deal with us until we're done figuring all this stuff out.
yeah, no. I was actually thinking about how fascinating it is to me, and I'm afraid I'm going to have to scram pretty quick here. I think I can almost feel my wife upstairs cursing my name because she's up there doing all the rest of the Christmas decorations and
Yeah.
ahead of the kids coming into town. But so I'm going to have to scram pretty quick here. But one of the things that I thought about as you guys were talking about how you develop your characters and how they react to their to their situations and the dynamics that develop that you don't even realize until after you've put them in those situations is the most fascinating stories to me. And I love watching like Peaky Blinders was one of my favorite series, and I'm rewatching Nucky Thompson, Boardwalk Empire right now. And one of the things that is fascinating to me, and I noticed that I really I fall for this every time. Breaking Bad, Ozark, Peaky Blinders, Boardwalk Empire, all of these series is I'll start to fall in love with a character, and he or she is completely sympathetic, and then these writers will they'll take those characters and they'll make them do something that makes me hate them. And I just came to that to this it's like the end of season 2 in Boardwalk Empire, where Nucky Thompson was like, he was kind of my hero. I was like, man, that guy's so cool. He handles business, but he's got a sense of fairness and so forth and so on. But then, like, he did something, and I don't, in case anybody else is watching, I don't want to do a spoiler, but he did something that made me go, are you kidding me? And then, the next season is like continuing on, and he's being mean to his wife, and he's doing all these like real cutthroat, mean spirited things. And I feel sometimes like these writers, they're doing it to just because they can't, because they are God. They are the Lord on high, and they are creating these characters who are like making you love them and then hate them, and they go, oh well, I can kind of understand, like I could see myself doing that in that situation. But to me, those are the kinds of things that make me really admire great writing, is when an author can be writing this story and talking about this person and delivering their, like a lawyer, delivering their motivations so well that you're reading, and you're 10 miles into the story before you realize, wait a minute, that's really screwed up. Like this person, like that's a bad thing to do. I shouldn't be, sympathizing with this character. But, to me, like an author who can do that, who can bring you along and help you sympathize with a character that really shouldn't be sympathetic is kind of magic. I mean, I think it's just an incredible
Yeah.
thing to be able to do.
Those are the characters I like writing because I like to make my readers think and consider consider morality and consider what what they think is the overall good and the overall bad versus maybe what society tells us is good and bad, law versus justice, vengeance versus justice and stuff like that. And so what you're talking about, these characters are all anti-heroes. And there's a difference between that and a villain. And I was at a conference one time, and I had somebody, break it down in a way that I really understood. A villain is somebody who, so they both do morally questionable things and, outright bad things, right? Like you were talking about. So the villain, whenever push comes to shove, they are going to do the what we would consider, what most moral people would consider the wrong thing. They are going to kill the innocent person. They are going to steal the whatever. They are going to do that bad thing. Whereas an anti-hero, when push comes to shove, they are, even if they've done a bunch of terrible stuff before, at the critical moment in your storytelling, right? And we're talking about villains and anti-heroes within the confines of a story, not in real life. Within the confines of a story, when it comes down to that, that climax, that critical moment, they're going to do what most moral people would call the right thing. And so even if they've done all this terrible stuff, that can be their redemption, and that can be part of their character arc. Now that doesn't always, that's not necessarily always the thing. Let's see. And so, obviously, Troy, you mentioned you're about to have to go, but yeah, I think, writers definitely do that on purpose. If they set out to depict, especially if they're real people or if they're based on real people from history, whenever they set out to do that, they definitely have to find ways to make sure that they are making them the anti-hero, and in some cases being true to life. But, being able to make people sympathize with somebody who does those bad things is an art to itself. And it is something that, people like me who write those type of characters really, really enjoy the kind of feedback that you were giving those series. But we're gonna let you go.
Okay.
I don't know if Katie, if you need to go too, or if you want to stay on, but we're coming up on almost an hour and 40 minutes. So if you want to call it quits, we can. What do you think, Katie?
Yeah, I probably should go. I feel the same. My husband's probably like, all right, are we ever gonna he gets up really early, so
Yeah.
yeah, and there is a lot to do.
Yeah.
There is a lot to do leading up to Christmas here in these next few days. So yeah.
These 2 weeks are so crazy.
I like just me posted. I don't know Just Me's real name, but she said, but I like the bad boys.
Well, yeah, I mean, there's nothing wrong with that.
Yeah. So,
well, listen, and then we have
it was really good hanging out with you.
Keep Troy safe.
Yeah.
Yes. It is. It has been great, and thank you to those of you who tuned in. Troy, Katie, and I had a great time. So I always, at the end of this, give everybody a minute if they're not following all three of us and you enjoyed the conversation, please do. That's one way you can help us out and to thank us. And thank you for everyone who sent likes. This may be the most likes that we've ever gotten on one of these. And thank you for the gifts. And I know we probably couldn't get all your questions. We get a lot of people in here, but hopefully you had fun discussing with us and amongst each other and with Tanya. And yes, free Troy. We are going to let everyone go.
Next time I'll remember to brush my hair.
Yeah. Yeah, I admire you for, and in some of your videos too, you definitely do not give an F what you don't edit out the rough parts. So
I don't.
I admire you. I have trouble doing that. So
thank you.
Everyone, thank you in the comments. Thank you, guests, and we're gonna let you go. And we will be back next week. Let's all have a great holiday, and we'll see you next year.
All right. Merry Christmas.
Thank you.
Guys.
Merry Christmas.
Merry
Happy
Christmas.
New Year.
Happy holidays, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.